بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ويدعو الإنسان بالشر دعاءه بالخير وكان الإنسان عجولا صدق الله العلي العظيم. The focus of social sciences revolves around human behavior. And the holy grail of social sciences is predictability. How predictable a human being is in his behavior. We have two things, motion and emotion, which both come from the same root word, motion, meaning movement. Emotions are that which cause an impulse towards movement. So if a person is feeling sadness, the motion is what? The motion that he is impulsed towards is weeping. If he feels happiness, another emotion, the motion which he is impulsed towards is probably laughing or smiling. We live in a world which is categorized for the most part by instant gratification. And instant gratification is when a person acts out of impulse. And this is mentioned or illustrated in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيَدْعُ الْإِنسَانُ بِالشَّرِّ دُعَاءَهُ بِالْخَيْرِ وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ عَجُولًا. That indeed mankind is what? Ajul, he is hasty. He makes his decisions upon impulse. And when you look at the world of consumerism, for instance, companies which offer a product or offer a service, what they try to do is they try to study human behavior and predictability. And some of them have entire departments dedicated to studying human behavior, consumerism. What a person would be impulsed to buy. They study that and then they're able to tweak or modify their service or their product in order to make the most business out of the consumer who purchases upon impulse. That's why a big problem in consumerism is what they refer to as impulse shopping. You see something and you purchase it right away. You don't think, well, do I need this? Do I not need this? Can I afford this? Can I not afford this? And today we live in a world where everything is at your fingertips. You want to purchase something, you don't have to go to the store anymore. You sit there on your device, you have the app, you have a credit card, and whatever you want comes delivered straight to you. You don't even have to pick it up, right? You can literally sit on your couch at home and you can purchase electronics, you can purchase clothes, you can purchase food, you can purchase books, you can purchase furniture, you can even purchase a car and have all of these things delivered to you while you're still sitting at your couch. And the companies, they drool over this. They know that human beings are, for the most part, acting out of impulse. Even when people, I'll give you an example, when people declare bankruptcy, when you declare bankruptcy, one thing that happens is your credit gets destroyed and you can't open a credit card, your credit cards get canceled. What happens after that period of 60 days or 90 days or 120 days or 6 months, depending on the situation, as soon as it's over, your mailbox gets flooded with credit card offers. They want you to start impulse shopping again. And that's the whole point behind credit cards. That's why some people encourage you to just rip your credit card in half. You don't need it, because that encourages impulse shopping. وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ عَجُولًا. This is a problem. When it comes to the use or the abuse of recreational drugs, you find that impulse, acting upon impulse, self-gratification, instant self-gratification is a problem. Why do people take drugs? They know that the drugs are not going to cause any long-lasting happiness. It gives you the satisfaction right away, right? That's why sometimes they call it a quick fix. When a person wants a drug, they call it a quick fix. Or when a person drinks alcohol, one of the terms that they refer to it, alcohol, is liquid courage. Why do they call it liquid courage? Courage is an emotion which comes from a person who is stable, and courage is long-lasting. Courage doesn't come one day and go another day. If you're courageous, usually you have that attribute of courage for a long time. But they call it liquid courage because you drink it and you feel courageous, as long as the effects are there. The disoriented effects are there. So it's a big problem. A study was done at Stanford University in the 1960s where a group of toddlers were taken. They were 4 years old. And what they did was they placed them in a room, they placed a table in front of them, and they put a marshmallow in front of them. So the person who was providing the test put the marshmallow and then gave the child an option. He said, I'm going to go run some errands and I'll be back in 15 minutes. You can either have the marshmallow while I'm gone, or you can wait, and if the marshmallow is still there when I'll come back, I'll give you another one. To test their impulse of instant self-gratification. So it was interesting. Some of the toddlers, as soon as the person left, the tester left, they grabbed the marshmallow and they downed it. Some of them, they waited for the person to come back. They waited for a greater reward. And they knew that their patience, if they rejected their impulse and implied their patience, that it would pay off at the end. So it was interesting. The results were interesting. One was that they asked the children who waited, well, how did you wait? How did you manage? Some of them said that we covered our eyes so we don't look at it. Some of them said that we tried to fall asleep. Some of them said we started talking to ourselves and imaginary friends just to get our minds off of what was in front of us. What's even more interesting was the long-lasting results. The point behind this test was not only to test them instantly, but to follow these children as they grew up. And this was in the 1960s. So they followed these children. They were 4 years old when they took the test. They followed them throughout school, elementary school, junior high, high school, through college, through adolescence, and through adulthood. They found that these children who resisted the initial impulse did better in school. They concentrated better. They did their homework on time. When they were faced with tests and hardships, they can defeat them. When they were in high school, they also did better. When they had to deal with problems of being a teenager and adolescence, they didn't cave into their hardships. They had better self-confidence. They were more assertive. And they were able to use that ability to resist their impulse, the instant self-gratification, in order to better their lives. The other group, however, failed miserably. They didn't do good emotionally. They were depressed. They had stress. And subhanAllah, they were able to determine this just from one act. Because the person who's not going to be able to resist at a young age, at that age, is not going to be able to resist at an older age. That's why, not only in Islam, but in other religions as well, we focus on the first 7 years of the children's life, right? Isn't that what the Prophet tells us, and isn't that what Islam tells us, is to focus on the first 7 years? Don't allow your child to go and eat whatever they want and do whatever they want. It's true. Some parents, they have this. They say that let the child eat haram. He's younger than 7 years old, younger than 9 or 12 years old. Allah is not going to hold him accountable. That's true, Allah may not hold him accountable, but that has an effect on his character. It has an effect which will last till the rest of his life. So it was very interesting. So an interesting or a very important characteristic to have, is to be able to resist the impulse. وَيَدْعُ الْإِنسَانُ بِالشَّرِّ دُعَاءَهُ بِالْخَيْرِ وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ عَجُولًا. God says that man is hasty. He wants everything instantly, instant gratification. And the society that we live in, it encourages you. It tells you, you know what, have the pleasure right now. Don't worry about what's going to happen. Islam says no. Think. And it says that those who make hasty decisions without thinking, that is from the shaitan. Whenever a person wants to make a decision, whenever there's right and wrong, remember the shaitan will always be there. He wants to take advantage of you. He wants to take advantage of your weakness. Yesterday we spoke about the instability of emotions. Shaitan knows about the instability of our emotions. And our emotions are what cause that impulse action. What causes us to act without thinking. وَيَدْعُ الْإِنسَانُ بِالشَّرِّ دُعَاءَهُ بِالْخَيْرِ وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ عَجُولًا. There are two things which are mentioned in this verse. One is that the human being prays for what he thinks is good, but in reality it is evil. And also, he is very hasty in his decisions, because these two things are intertwined. Many times, and this is because we are very short-sighted. As a human being, we are very short-sighted by nature. And of course, there are many different factors which contribute to our short-sightedness. One is our own sins. Our sins make us short-sighted. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ فُرْقَانًا. He who has taqwa, he who does not sin, Allah gives him the ability, discernments, to distinguish between that which is right and that which is wrong. These two ideas are intertwined. Asking for something which we think is good for us, in reality it is bad. It is said that one day one of the prophets was walking and he saw a group of youth, young men, abusing another young man, and that young man was blind. So this righteous prophet, he turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he said, "Oh Allah, cure this young man of his blindness, so that he may defend himself." And Allah did so. What happened after was interesting. This young man, who was once blind and now has his sight, turned to those people and he began to beat them harder than they were beating him. And those people who were oppressed, who were oppressing, now became the oppressed. So God taught that prophet that, look, you prayed for someone which you thought was good, but in reality, it was evil for him. And this is something which will always plague us as human beings. Why? Because we will never understand the wisdom behind the decisions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why He says that man prays for good, what he thinks is good, but in reality, it is evil. And this demonstrates a few things. One, when it comes to defections, one is that it demonstrates Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's omnipotence, His ability to create that which is perfect and that which is defective, and to show us signs of perfection and defection in one thing. For instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when He speaks about the thunder and He speaks about the lightning, وَهُوَ الَّذِي يُرِيكُمُ الْبَرْقَ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا. He says that this lightning or this thunder, which is one thing in itself, two things happen. Fear is brought from it and hope is brought from it. Two completely opposite things. This same defect which we see, we ask, why are there defections? Why are some people born with defections? Why are some people born with bodily defects? Why are some people born with moral defects? To answer this, we must answer a few questions. Well, one of them is that it shows the omnipotence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His authority over everything. He can create that which is perfect and He can create that which is defective. Number one. Number two is that when it comes to things which are defective, for instance, birth defects, how do we know what is perfect if we do not recognize or know that which is defective? This is one way to understand something, is that you know the opposite of that thing, and that acts as a pointer to that thing. How do you know what light is without darkness? How do you know what beauty is without ugliness? How do you know what wealth is without poverty? So defections are actually a sign of the perfection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That something is defective, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can create something which is the opposite of that, and that is perfect. Some people, and this is a problem that atheists have, and they pose to creationists. They say that, well, what about evil? The evil that you see in this world. God created evil, that means He's an evil God? Well, no. Evil is the opposite of good. God created good, and if it was not for the existence of evil, we would never know what good is. Imagine, how can you know what good is if you don't know what evil is? You have to know what they are and be able to distinguish them. This is why Al-Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he says, during one of his battles, he turns to one of his companions. He says, اعرف الحق تعرف أهله واعرف الباطل تعرف أهله. Know what good is, then you'll be able to distinguish who is good. And know what evil is, and you'll be able to distinguish what evil is. Who is evil? So we know these things by their opposites. One more thing is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with these defections that we see, He tests us. And this is what He says in the Quran. وَجَعَلْنَا بَعْضَكُمْ لِبَعْضٍ فِتْنَةً أَتَصْبِرُونَ. That some of you have been created as a fitna, a test for others. This is why the best thing to do, if you see somebody with some sort of defection, if it's a birth defect for instance, the first thing you do is you turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Say, thank you my Lord for giving me sight. You may not have given this person sight, but you have blessed me with sight. Thank you my Lord when you see a person who is poor. Thank you my Lord for giving me wealth. If you see a person who is sick, thank you my Lord for giving me health. Forbearance and patience. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala afflicts us with defections so that when we have perfection in our life, we will be grateful towards Him. Imagine if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you perfect from day one. No problems, no hardships at all. This goes against what the Quran says. The hadith says that a believer, every 40 days, a believer is tested with some form of hardship. Every 40 days. He's tested with his wealth, he is tested with his health, with his house, with his car, some form of test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, every 40 days. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, what does he say? صَبَرْتُ وَفِي الْعَيْنِ قَدَى. He says, I had patience and I had forbearance. And he wouldn't mention any of his problems to anybody. Why? Who can understand? Who can bear the problems of Amir al-Mu'mineen? Could anybody understand him? Except for the only person who could understand him and console him was Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam. He says, what I had was patience. When he speaks of patience, as-sabr, and forbearance, al-hilm, forbearance is great patience. It's patience which is multiplied. He says that patience and forbearance were more beneficial to me than the bravest of men. I found more benefit in patience than the bravest men that I could ever command. The problem is when we look at defections, the biggest problem is that we have taken Allah out of the equation. We have taken divine compensation out of the equation. If we remember that this life is not the real life, the next life is the real life. وَإِنَّ الدَّارَ الْآخِرَةَ لَهِيَ الْحَيَوَانِ. That the next life is the real life, and the next life is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us a real retribution. I'll give you an example. If the life of a person is unjustly taken, وَمَنْ قَتَلَ نَفْسًا بِغَيْرِ نَفْسٍ أَوْ فَسَادٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ فَكَأَنَّمَا قَتَلَ النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا. He who kills somebody unjustly, it is as if he has killed all of mankind. So if a person is killed by accident, for instance, one of the things which happens is that the person who commits the murder, or the manslaughter, should we say, because manslaughter usually refers to unintentional murder. If a person commits manslaughter in Islam, one of the things that he has to do is that he has to pay the relatives of the one who is murdered compensation. And if he takes a life, it is, according to our books of jurisprudence, it is 1,000 gold dinar, which in today is, I believe, a couple $100,000. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that if you take somebody's life, it is as if you have taken the life of all of mankind. So what is this diya? What is this compensation worth? This compensation is not reflective of the value of that human being. Because no matter how much you pay a person, you can never compensate his family for his loss. If you take a father away from a family, or if you take a mother away from a family, can you compensate his family? These days they have medical malpractice lawsuits. The other day I was hearing about a medical malpractice lawsuit where a man who was disabled won $50 million. And I thought to myself when I heard $50 million, the cash signals roll in your eyes when you hear $50 million. But then I thought to myself, well, this person is disabled. He's lost his ability to walk. Even if you give him $100 million, that's not going to bring it back. So when we pay that person, it is not reflective of the value of that person's soul. Rather, it is reflective of the services which are lost due to the loss of that person's life. So if it's a father, for instance, the father is usually the breadwinner of the family. He's responsible for putting food on the table. You compensate his family for that service which now has been lost, which now has been taken away. That's the philosophy behind blood money, behind diya. Or else, you can never really or truly compensate a person for a life that's lost. So we need to understand this, that compensation comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing in this life, no perfection that He can grant us in wealth or in health, will ever amount to what He has given those who wait, who have patience and forbearance until the afterlife. One of the companions of our sixth Imam, Al-Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam, his name is Abdullah ibn Abi Ya'fur. Very good companion. He came to the Imam one day and he began to complain. He said, I have so much pains in my body. The Imam turned to him. He said that if you knew the reward that was waiting for you, for the suffering that you have in this world, he said if mankind knew about the reward that waits for them, in return for the suffering that they suffer in this world, every single man would wish that he was cut into pieces in this world, just for that reward. One of the companions of our fifth Imam, Abu Basir, Layth al-Muradi, a very great companion who lived during the time of our fifth and sixth Imams, and he has many narrations. This man was blind, and this is why they refer to him as Abu Basir. Basir in Arabic means the one who can see. But usually they would refer to a person, they would give him a title which was opposite of what was truly reflected in him. So a person who was blind, they would refer to as Basir. Abu Basir lived for most of his life as a blind man. Very great, loyal companion to Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. He comes to the fifth Imam, Al-Imam Al-Baqir, and he says, I want you to pray to Allah for him to bring my sight back. I want to be able to see. And the Imam does this, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants him his sight. After He grants him his sight, the fifth Imam turns to him. He says, Ya Aba Basir, would you rather stay like this and have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hold you accountable for everything that you see? Or would you rather have it that you go back as a blind man and you enter the heaven without accountability? How much of our sin, think about it, how much of our sin is brought just from our eyes? قل للمؤمنين يغضوا من أبصارهم ويحفظوا فروجهم وقل للمؤمنات يغضضن من أبصارهن ويحفظن فروجهن. How much sin is brought only from our eyes? Abu Basir looked at him, he said, if that's the case, then I want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make me blind again. And he lived the rest of his life blind. Narrations have it that on the day of judgment, when people will see the reward, the retribution of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they would begin to wish that in this world, none of their dreams came true. Those who are not given much in this world, those who are believers, of course, and are not given much in this world, there are immense rewards that are waiting for them in the hereafter. Let us not forget this. Many people, atheists of course, they don't believe in divine retribution. They don't believe in hereafter. But even sometimes as Muslims, we forget about retribution. We forget about the reward that is waiting for us in the hereafter. So let us ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the grace of this holy month, to one, allow us to see properly, not allow us to fall and make hasty decisions, and allow us to ask Him for things which we don't think are good for ourselves, but is good for ourselves in His eyes. That He grants us that which is truly beneficial according to His standards and to our standards. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك قاضي الحاجات إنك على كل شيء قدير برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.